Uh, Next up, we have something a little different. We have a chat between Dion and James Pierce from Facebook. James actually runs the open source group at Facebook and has a long history at being instrumental in both the mobile and open source communities. In his previous role at Sencha, he also contributed a lot in the community, and at .mobi, he was also instrumental in figuring out how we could work more effectively with standards bodies to create an open foundation that companies could work on. Dion himself actually also is no stranger to open source communities. He worked at Mozilla and also at Google. Google, he worked in the open source office, and at Mozilla, obviously, did a lot of open source stuff. And he's going to lead the conversation with James. So, Dion and James Pierce.
Great, thanks a lot, Ben. Yeah, one of the interesting things that kind of bonds James and I to each other beyond the work that we did together for the open web and mobile and all this stuff is we actually found out relatively recently that we grew up just kind of down the street to each other in England, going to two rivaling schools, you may say, in the Essex area of England, a beautiful part of the world.
That seems like a long time ago.
Yes, exactly. David Beckham was a little bit further down the road. So thanks a lot for joining us here. Today we're going to take in this session, a little bit of a different tack. We're not going to be talking about open source business models and the like, but more about how open source is being run in larger companies. How's it being run? How do people get involved? What are the strategies behind it? And I've seen a lot of change in what Facebook has been doing with open source recently. As Ben talked about, I was part of the open source team at Google, and this was a pre-GitHub era, and we thought about things, a little bit differently back then. And so I think it's interesting to see how that's changed. So to kick things off, James, if you can kind of chat about, what's the strategy behind open source at Facebook, how things have changed over your time, and just kind of walk us through that.
All right. So I joined Facebook about 2.5 years ago, but I've been working on the open source program for about 9 months now. Obviously, the open source program at Facebook predates me a long way. The early projects that Facebook was involved with included Cassandra, which I know was mentioned earlier this morning, Memcache, and a bunch of things around Hadoop and Hive, and a bunch of the big data infrastructure pieces that we did. And certainly when that was started, there was a lot of enthusiasm for it. So, as you can imagine, Facebook was built on open source from day zero. When Mark sat down and built the first version of the Facebook, it was PHP, MySQL, running on Apache and Linux. So it was a classic LAMP stack, and it's made it very easy for us as an engineering organization to talk about doing open source when the CEO of the company, built it on open source from the very beginning. So we've never had any trouble getting management buy-in. But that kind of program that got kicked off 4 or 5 years ago kind of got neglected. And I think it's no secret that a lot of the projects that we initially spun out kind of died away and lost momentum. And I think someone earlier this morning mentioned the wall. We'd thrown this stuff over the wall. And that's absolutely right. And unfortunately, in a fast-moving engineering organization like Facebook, the teams that built a project or the individuals that built a project, they'll push something out that they're really excited about, but then they move on to something else, or they leave the company, and the momentum dies. And if the community hasn't kind of gotten the momentum, the flywheel spinning, it can quickly die away. And in that case, it's almost worse than not having done anything at all, because you've not just thrown it over the wall, but it's a Molotov cocktail that you've thrown over the wall. It's a piece of software that people are going to start building their businesses on or using for their startups or whatever, that is now no longer supported and doesn't have a community around it. So we're very sorry for that. But about a year ago, we realized we needed to fix it and get the program back into a decent shape. And so I had previously been working on the Facebook platform, so I've always been working with developer communities and working with companies using the Facebook platform and the Facebook APIs. And we looked to see whether we could basically reboot the open source program at Facebook and bring it back to where it needed to be. And actually that journey's been kind of an interesting one. We can talk about it a little bit, but I think that the reason that we do open source at Facebook as a whole is I think there are probably 3 parts to it. There's Firstly, the fact that it's a core part of our engineering brand. We are probably the only company on the planet that had a paragraph about what it meant to be a hacker in our S1 filing. We're probably the only company that has, every month has a hackathon where the entire engineering team, and in fact non-engineers also come together and just hack on stuff. And we even have the word hack blazoned into our courtyard at the campus. So obviously hacking, which is fairly well aligned with the open source philosophy, I suppose. It's a core part of who we are as engineers. That obviously in turn helps recruiting and it helps retention and all those other good things down the line. Secondly, there's an efficiency angle on this. So we obviously, when we bring new engineers on to work at Facebook, we're asking them to get up to speed on our own internal stack. If we want them to be productive as quickly as possible, the more familiar they can get with that stack, the quicker, the better. And what we found is that those engineers who come on to the engineering team who have previously worked on the open source versions of that software are going to become far more efficient or far more effective, far quicker, because this is technology they've already been using before they joined the company. And we see that in data infrastructure, we see that in the world of PHP and HHVM, and we see that in the world of React. People are coming and joining the company that already know how to be productive immediately. And the third thing, I think, is just more aligned with our overall company mission. As a company, and Mark certainly, we're trying to make the world a more open and connected place. And people think about sharing cat photos on Facebook, but that mission also applies to the software ecosystem. And if we can help, be more open, sharing the software that we produce, helping that knowledge economy to be more effective wherever it is in the world, then, in a humble way, we're contributing to that mission as well.
Great. So I've heard that Facebook is kind of known for being very data-driven. So you bootstrap this open source programs group. What's success for you guys? How do you measure these projects?
Yeah, so this is, I guess, a little bit of the Facebook culture as well. Although the fact that we're fast and kind of scrappy is what we're well known for, we're also extremely data-driven, as you might imagine. We have lots of data about how things are running, both on the website and internally. And what I wanted to do initially was just try to figure out what state this portfolio was in. We had, at the time, about 120 projects that we had previously open sourced in various forms. And just for me personally, to try to get my head around what all these things were and how active they were, I needed to kind of do an analysis of what was out there. Fortunately, most of them are on GitHub. Fortunately, GitHub has an amazing API. And so, a few scripts later, we basically had a snapshot of where all of our projects were in terms of how many there were and how many people were following them, how many people were forking them, how many people were committing to them, and the sort of general engagement that we were getting from the communities. So that was like a one-off thing, just for my own personal kind of interest, but then quickly realized that if we could automate that and turn that into a regular audit of the state of our open source, we could start to build out a set of metrics that we would be able to use to prove whether we were being successful or not. And now we've got to a point where, I do produce a monthly report to my management chain saying, these are the projects that we launched this month, these are the ones that we deprecated this month, these are the ones that are doing well, these are the ones that have got a high ratio of external committers. And very specifically, we look at the number of people that follow a project, because that's a good sort of early intent. We look at the number of people that fork a project, which is like the next step of intent. It's like, okay, now they're actually starting to use it probably. And we have about a 1-to-5 ratio there, or 5-to-1 ratio. We have probably one fork for every 5 followers on average. And then we look at the number of commits that we actually get back from the community, which is probably a 1-to-2 ratio from the number of people that fork. So we get just over 2 commits per fork. And then we also look at the pull requests and the issues that are outstanding on all of these projects. One thing we've noticed is that if a community has, if they look at a project and they just see a huge, screen full of issues and unclosed pull requests, that can be a real turnoff. So we've really tried to motivate our own internal engineers to look at all those issues, triage them as quickly as possible, deal with them as quickly as possible, and similarly for pull requests. And we actually have a metric which we call issue day or pull request day, which is basically the total sum of days that all of the pull requests on a given project have been open. And that kind of gives you an indication of how fresh the content is and how well we've been maintaining and dealing with the old issues and pull requests that were sent. And I think we've worked hard to get those metrics down, and those projects that have got that metric down faster are those that are really starting to get really, really good community traction. So we think there's a decent correlation. And it allows me to look across all of our projects, which is now 220 projects or something, and see which ones are doing well and which ones are doing badly on a day-by-day basis. Each engineering team now has a dashboard that they can look at, they can see their graphs, and they can see how they're doing relative to all the other teams, and it kind of gamifies the whole thing. Like at the end of the day, we're a very small team, and yet we have hundreds and hundreds of engineers doing open source stuff. But if I can produce the tools and I can kind of create a gamified environment for them to compete with each other, it actually helps them to move things in the right direction.
Cool. So if I'm a Facebook engineer and I've got this little bit of code that I want to get out there, what's the process for going from there to fully getting it as part of the Facebook official open source?
Right. So naturally, I get lots of engineers coming to me wanting to open source something they've done. Like it's some pet project, or it's some cool thing that they did at a hackathon, or it's an intern who's just done something wonderful and wants to share it with the world. And obviously, we do have to have some vetting process. We can't give everybody admin rights to our GitHub repo and just let them push it out there. There are certain pieces of engineering that we have at Facebook that we don't want to share with the world, but there are some that we do. And basically what we've done is carve up the portfolio into these 3 or 4 big themes: data infra, web front end, and increasingly mobile. And basically, if a project is in one of those kind of areas, like it's looking good, right? We're going to be kind of confident at open sourcing that. Things that we don't open source, anything to do with ads, anything to do with core product, and generally kind of UI-based things. Just because we think there's a little bit of a competitive advantage there. So if an engineering team comes and it fits well into that portfolio, we basically ask them to answer 6 or 7 simple questions. How soon do you want to release it? Where's it going to live? Who's going to be responsible for maintaining it? Which is a very important question. And basically, once they've answered those questions, we can get a legal review, we can get a trademark review, we can get the GitHub repo spun up, we can get them pushing the code, and we can turn it live within 48 hours. So we can do this really, really quickly. We've got it down to a fine art. It's kind of running on rails at this point. And I don't know, if you've been watching our Twitter account or our Facebook page and the GitHub account, you'll see we've been doing quite a lot recently. We've got it to quite an efficient process at this point.
Very cool. That's quick. One of the funny things that we have on the Walmart Labs open source process is we have an artist for one set of projects that we have that does custom artwork for every, just because of like the lead of our Node.js stuff is just obsessed with art. So he's added the checkbox of, do you have the artist rendering yet? Which is kind of bizarre. Yeah,
well, that's actually interesting. We've put a lot of effort into, it seems like a small thing, but we put a lot of effort into trying to get logos for some of the major projects, right? It's a sort of an avatar that can be then associated with that project, and it makes for great stickers, makes for great t-shirts, and it's kind of like, it's sort of table stakes at this point. For a new Facebook project, you need to have a decent logo and a color scheme, and we have a single designer that does all of this. It's kind of fun. And then the teams start to, as the community starts to take grip, the teams start to build out bigger and bigger websites. They start up their own blogs. They start running their own hackathons, and they start running their own meetups. And basically, like, these are the steps that we see as a project goes through these sort of increasing levels of maturity. But making it look nice is a disproportionately powerful effect to get these things going well in the first place.
Yeah, very cool. So one of the things that I've seen recently is in the past, I've seen a large company come up with something generally useful that a bunch of other companies have then jumped on. I noticed that with the web scale MySQL-based work, that seemed to kind of come out of the gate with a bunch of large companies together. Can you tell us a bit about the story of that and how that came about?
So that one is a little bit different, obviously, because it's something that we're doing in conjunction with a number of other companies. It had been going on for a little while with engineering teams way down inside each of the 4 companies involved, which was Facebook and Google, Twitter, and LinkedIn, all of whom were using MySQL extensively, but had specific requirements at the sort of scale that each of these 4 companies operate, and wanted to kind of keep maintaining the test cases and so forth, things that had sort of fallen behind a little bit in the public version. And so there was this concerted effort to work together as 4 companies. And then it kind of dawned on them, I think, that they ought to open source the work they were doing, because there might be other companies at scale that wanted to do these kinds of things. And again, we managed to pull together the launch of the web scale SQL site and repo, in a matter of weeks. I mean, it was really, really quick. And I should point out, this is not a fork. I mean, this is a branch. This is very much work that we want to have go back into the community. But that was a special one, because it was a chance for us to prove that we play nicely with others.
Cool. You've said that there's been a bit of a journey from the old days of throwing out Cassandra and what have you. What have you learned from them to now, and what's different?
So I think there's one key thing, which is ownership, establishing ownership. And it's, again, something we've been able to do with the tools. If there's an individual or a team, and I guess at that time, Facebook was a much smaller company as well, so there was much more, engineers moving around between things and, having lots on their plate. Now we've got to a point where there are pretty clear ownership, guidelines for each project. There has to at least be, one engineer and one product manager who are sort of named against a given project. And I have a big, tool that lists out all the projects, and I can see who these individuals are. And those are the people that I prod when the number of pull requests is getting too high or whatever. And also it means that if I see someone moving teams, or they leave the company, like a little red light, literally a little red light starts flashing on the dashboard. It's like, James has got to go and chase up that management chain and find out who's going to be the new maintainer. Because we can't, under any circumstances, have a project that's not maintained by an employee. Well, that's not strictly true. I mean, there is an end game for some of these projects where we do actually, release them out into the community. That's another story. So I think ownership is really the main thing, and just having somebody, myself or people on my team who are just following up on that really aggressively, and making sure that everybody is committed. The other thing we've worked hard on is increasing the visibility of open source inside of Facebook and the recognition that people get for doing it. In a company like Facebook, people have lots of conflicting demands on their time, as you might imagine, and making sure that open source is recognized as one of those, means that engineers are going to carve out the time they need to do a good job. And so it's small things. Every Friday afternoon, Mark will do a Q&A for all of the company, where he'll answer questions and talk about what's been going on in the company that week. And we make a point of getting him to talk about the major open source releases from that week. So when we open sourced Hack 2 or 3 weeks ago, and when we open sourced Presto, and when we open sourced a couple of our other big things, he'll stand up and he'll do it as part of his intro, alongside the new version of Messenger or whatever else it is we've launched that week. And that gives an immense sense of pride to the engineers that have worked on it, and it really kind of fires them up. And people are beginning to realize now that open source is something that Mark recognizes inside the company, and therefore it's something that's worth them spending time on.
Cool. So you've got a lot of very varied projects out there. One that I found interesting when it came out was all centered around the data center design and all that stuff. What was the reasoning behind open sourcing that?
So that's the Open Compute project. So that's a separate kind of pillar, if you like. I'm dealing almost exclusively with the software portfolio. But yeah, we have the Open Compute project, which is 3-4 years old now, I think, which is us open sourcing the designs to our hardware and to our servers and storage and now networking and the actual data centers themselves. And all the blueprints, literally, for this stuff are made public, which I think is pretty amazing. But it's also grown way beyond what it is that Facebook has ever, expected it to become. It's now got members from all over that industry. They have a summit every year with 3,000 people coming, and it's now grown to be this huge thing. Initially, I think we did it because, we were playing catch up with a number of other companies who had big data center, initiatives, and the only way we could really catch up was to open source and help the community and the industry, move faster towards where we needed it to go, at the same time benefiting itself. So I guess all of this is ultimately enlightened self-interest, but we want to make sure there's as much enlightenment as there is self-interest.
Cool. On the end game comment from before, you talked about Hack, and you talked earlier about having these employees that know as much about the stack as possible when they come on. What's the reasoning between taking PHP that a ton of people know and kind of extending it a little bit and maybe taking it in a new direction in some ways? What's the thought process there?
Yeah, so I'll just give you a quick background on Hack. As I'm sure nearly everybody knows, we used PHP from the start at Facebook. And anyone that actually uses PHP knows it's a joke. I think that's that's fair to say. It has a lot of weaknesses as a language. It has a lot of advantages, though. I mean, you can develop really, really quickly with it. You can Alt-Tab F5, and you can get very quick development cycle. It has lots of flaws. Okay, and when you're operating at a company of our size with, let's say, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 engineers all writing this code, suddenly, a lot of the principles of that developer cycle start to collapse. So we needed to add things like stronger typing. We needed to add the ability to make refactoring a lot easier, because you've got people working with each other's code and moving things around, and it's very, very easy to break. We wanted to add some kind of modern language features like collections and arrays and so to replace arrays and so forth. And all of these have been, again, for our own self-interest, but we have no commercial benefits to keeping that to ourselves. I mean, why not share what we've done to the language with the rest of the world? HHVM, which is the runtime that sits underneath it, is already, a much higher performance alternative for many of the PHP runtimes. And it just seemed natural to want to share it. And of course, anyone joining the company will be familiar with this new language. And I think the end game for this is, yes, that it'll go on to become, something that lives and breathes outside of Facebook, and we'll just be yet another user of it versus, something that we developed ourselves.
Cool. Great. So we're out of time, but really appreciate all the time you've taken today, James. That was fun to chat about the changes that you're spearheading at Facebook. Cheers.
Thank you. Pleasure.
My favorite part of that was when James was talking about the PHP as a joke, sitting next to the creator of PHP, Andy Gutmans, who's about to join us for another panel.